If I could call the room to order, please. Okay, so it's Tuesday the 25th of January, 2 p.m. This is the Companies Committee. If I can request mobile phones to silent, please. If we go to the agenda, apologies for absence. Have we received any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. Have apologies been received from Councillor Sandal?
Councillor Stone.
Councillor Sue Sandal sent her apologies.
Thank you. Are there any disclosures of interest in the room or dispensations? No. As a reminder, you can declare disclosures of interest or dispensations at any stage in the meeting. Moving on to item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of November of last year. Are there any comments on the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of November? Councillor Dilks.
Sorry, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm obviously not a member of the committee, but I did follow the last meeting online, and I was I just wonder if on page 5, halfway down, I noticed the minutes record that the inclusion of Councillor Wood from the independent group as a director was welcomed. I wasn't at the meeting, followed it online. And in answer to a question, the council leader suggested that actually it was a personal appointment, Councillor Wood was, based on his abilities, rather than as a representative of the independent group. But anyone reading this might sort of come to the conclusion that Councillor Wood had been selected by the independent group to be a director. And I just wondered if that could be corrected. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I believe that was my recollection as well. Councillor Cook?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I suppose you could amend it to welcome the inclusion of Councillor Paul Wood, who is a member of the independent group. You know, you could change the wording slightly on that one. Semantic.
Fine, thank you. Are there any other comments on the minutes of the meeting? Okay, thank you. If Councillor Dill.
Yeah, sorry, I just have one more. Sorry, it's perhaps when you're not a member of the group that you a member of the committee that you raise these things. So on page 8, I just have a question, and it talks about the Invest SK meeting the business clubs and bringing all the club chairmen together to share best practice. I just wondered if that had happened, and if not, when it would happen. Thank you.
I think we'll cover that in the updates from the meeting. Are there any other comments on the accuracy of the minutes? Can I have a proposer for those minutes, please? Councillor Whittington, and the seconder? Councillor Knowles, thank you. All those in favour that this is a true and accurate record of that meeting, you raise your hand. Any against? And any abstentions? 2 abstentions. So that is carried as a true and accurate record. If I can move on to item 4, updates from the previous meeting. Councillor Dilks has sort of beaten the committee there, but I will allow that one to go first. Can we have an update on that, please? Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Thank you. So obviously we did have a very successful relaunch of the Stamford Business Club, which is incredibly well attended by local businesses. In terms of the wider meeting, that hasn't yet happened. However, I'm sure it'll happen in the next couple of months.
Okay, thank you. Back to the committee. Are there any other comments from the updates of the previous meeting? Okay, if there are no other comments, I'd like to move on and make some progress. Before we go into the substantive items on the agenda, it is a long agenda today. Slightly different to what my vice chairman and I was expecting. This does actually include details of the business plan for Leisure SK in item 9. I have spoken to the cabinet member for Leisure in that whilst that's there for context, a full and proper discussion of the business plan of Leisure SK will be happening in the next meeting. And that is only included to help us sign off budgetary numbers. So whilst this is a very long meeting, I don't want to go into a long discussion about the business plan of Leisure SK, because I think that merits its own, it's such a complex business plan, I think that merits its own meeting, frankly. So with that in mind, we still have a full agenda. if I can go for a verbal update on Gravitas heating, and that is, sorry, Gravitas housing, and that is with Councillor Cook.
Thank
Or
you.
Richard Wiles.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think again, another report will come to the next meeting in a more rounded way to actually bring right up to date the financial position for Gravitas. But by way of verbal update, just a quick recap on the financial gains this project is bringing to the council, and that is a 498,106 commuted sum direct to the council to support affordable housing in the vicinity of the development. 171,000 finance costs going to the council in respect of the loan that's in place between the company and the council. £107,000 worth of costs that have been charged from the council to the company in respect to the officer time to bring this development to fruition. And also new homes bonus receipts of £188,000, which reflects the 25 apartments that have been brought into the council tax base for the local authority as well. So in those terms, £964,000 has been directly or indirectly delivered to the council as a result of this. And of course, that impacts on the overall bottom line of the development. But I think taking a rounded view, the council can see some real financial benefits of the development over and above the fact that 25 families will be living in the heart of the town using all the local facilities. So just in terms of the units themselves, 25, 20 apartments and 5 townhouses. Now, the position as at today are 19 apartments have been sold. 1 is currently available. The seller, unfortunately, the chain broke and that sale can no longer progress. That's a very recent event. So there's 1 apartment, but interest in the apartments remains very strong. And of the 5 townhouses, 1 will be completed in March, 1 is under offer, and there are currently 3 available. So of the 25 units, 4 are currently available on the market, which is made up of 3 townhouses and 1 apartment. Since the relaunch, interest in all the properties there has actually accelerated quite significantly, particularly strong over the Christmas period in terms of viewings and interest expressed. And there have been offers on every single property, but unfortunately they are below what is viable for the company to consider. So there has been dialogue with would-be prospective vendors, and that continues. So hopefully that direction of travel remains strong, and we'll give you a more up-to-date position at your next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, comments and questions from the committee. Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Chair. A very optimistically provided report of everything that's wonderful about Gravitas. Thank you for that, Richard. I'm sure everybody will be pleased. The fact remains that all those issues of where revenue is coming to the council from and so on and so forth were all expected in the budget anyway. And the fact remains that the expected profit from the sale of the things will not be achieved. And of course, there will be a loss on properties that were built on property that we owned and we didn't have to pay for in the first place. So the rosy picture isn't quite so rosy as Richard seems to point out.
Okay, I would just also point out that when we go back to the business case for this was because the private market would not undertake this scheme because the profit margins were so narrow in the first instance. So actually, at the outset, this was a sub 5% return because it was a development that would not be brought forward to the market. So this was always a direct intervention by the council to stimulate growth in that area of Bourne where private sector would not tread. So this was always going to be a marginal scheme, but those other benefits I would suggest are relevant because that was the rounded view the council took from the outset.
Okay, any other comments and questions from the committee? Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. First question is, would it not be possible to have this as a written report, even if it was a last-minute written report? Because there were some quite detailed numbers that we were given, which certainly I haven't written down quick enough. And yes, it is a positive spin, and I wouldn't expect anything else. We need to be positive about our projects. I went to nearly all the meetings about Gravitas. It was never predicted that we would lose any money on it, full stop. Even though it was a marginal scheme, I think the first presentation said it will make so much money, and as it went on, we realised that we weren't going to make so much money. It is a shame that it is where it is. I seem to remember, was it the meeting before last or last meeting that we said that this would be the final project for Gravitas? Or was that mentioned as a potential option? Are we going to see anything else done by Gravitas in the future?
I mean, ultimately, that'll be a council decision. Clearly, Gravitas is a company of going concern. That there may still be a role for Gravitas beyond this, but there isn't a pipeline of projects beyond Wherries Lane at the current time. That's a conversation that potentially companies committee and or wider the council will need to make a decision on in the future. But clearly, anything in the future will need some financing arrangements between the council and the company if there was another project to follow.
Thank you. Can I just push you on when you think that phase of decision making will be needed? The next phase of Gravitas. When do you think that will happen?
I think Companies Committee have been clear to allow Gravitas to focus on the delivery of this particular project before we go to the next phase. So I think the Company Committee expectations will be a complete review and analysis of where we ended on this project, and then there'll be a conversation about is there an appetite for a further development to be put forward, and indeed whether the market has changed significantly enough for there to be a role to Gravitas. As I say, at that time, this was intervening in the market where the market wasn't supplying, but that picture may have changed to such an extent that there is no need for Gravitas.
Councillor Whittington.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, actually, I raised my hand just before Richard mentioned that, because it does say in the action notes that there will be a full review of Gravitas once all the properties have been sold, which I think is really important, because there potentially will be some lessons that will be learned from it. And I think it is probably the best approach to sort of have that review and, you know, look to see what comes out from that before Gravitas or before the council commits to doing anything else via Gravitas. I just think, you know, I'd feel a lot happier that if you know, that review is undertaken once all the properties are sold. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks for that, Councillor Whittington. I'll just renew the commitment from Councillor Dawson and myself that once that phase of the development has been completed, we believe that there should be a post-project review. That's something we've mentioned in previous meetings as well. Are there any other comments and questions on this? I just have a couple of comments as well. I would like to echo the comments that would be more helpful if some of these were written down. Actually, I think that some of these do add value to the council, and that we should take them in consideration in the round of the company when we're reviewing the success or failure of this product, because clearly this is a site that wasn't going to be brought forward by the private sector. However, it's easier to do that if they're written down so that we can see them. Like Councillor Bannister, I wasn't able to take those figures down. So if we can make sure we have a report in the next meeting, please, or perhaps even a written summary via email after this meeting, if that's okay. And just one other comment. It was incorporated in January, I noticed. When's the year end of this? Is it aligned with the council?
Yeah, the trading period is the same as the council's tax year, so 31st of March of each year.
Okay, so what's our tax mitigation strategy for this year? Are we posting earnings in this year? Do we have a tax mitigation strategy? Are we tax planning based upon the year end?
Yeah, currently there are no tax implications within this financial year, but we'll work with the accountants as we get closer to year end to understand whether there are any tax liabilities. We paid corporation tax in the first year, but that was reclaimed last year because a loss was declared last year because of the poor trading at that time of the apartments.
Okay, so we can see more information on that in a written report. Thank you. Are there any other comments and questions about Gravitas from the committee? Okay, fine. Thank you. Councillor Dilks, you wanted to add some comments.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I hear what colleagues are saying about the fact that Gravitas was there to look at where the market failed. I've got in front of me the October 2016 draft business plan for that was the predecessor to Gravitas being set up, and it says this item paragraph 3.3 says the strategic aims proposed are to work with the council and its partners and stakeholders. This company will 1. Support the council's ambition of financial self-sufficiency as set out in its developing commercial blueprint. And then the other bullet points, it goes on, and it's all about effectively making some money and an income for the council. Later on, it does mention, that there will be opportunities where the market has failed, but that is not in the strategic aims of the company that was set up. Thank you.
Okay, I'm grateful for your comments, Councillor Dill. So again, I'll just renew our commitment to do a proper review, but the right and proper time for that is when the business has either ceased trading or is between projects. So I'm grateful for those comments. If there are no other comments about Gravitas, I'd like to make some progress, please. Item 6, the appointment of directors for Environment SK, and this is with, Councillor Wotton, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. Following the news that Officer Ken Lyon is leaving SKDC to take on a new role, and that Councillor Robert Reid is stepping down from his Environment SK Director roles, this report suggests new director appointments. It is proposed that Alan Robertson, Deputy Chief Executive, is appointed as a Director of both Environment SK Limited and Environment SK Commercial Services Limited. Alan has over 30 years' experience in local government and brings a wealth of knowledge and skills. It is also proposed that an interim non-executive director is appointed for up to 1 year in order to support the board and bring in additional detailed knowledge of grounds maintenance operations. This would be a similar arrangement to the one Leisure SK Limited already has, and is also in line with the report considered by Companies Committee in June 2021, which envisaged engaging a non-executive director for Environment SK Limited. These proposals would ensure there is good mix of skills and experience on the board of Environment SK Limited. The report recommendations are: 1, Companies Committee is asked to approve the appointment of Alan Robertson as Director to Environment SK Limited and Environment SK Commercial Services Limited. And 2, Companies Committee is asked to approve the appointment of an interim non-executive director for up to 1 year with 1 month's notice to Environment SK Limited and or Environment SK Commercial Services Limited at a cost of £12,000. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any comments and questions in the room? Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. 2 or 3 obvious questions. In the minutes of the last meeting that we had in early December, we asked if Councillor Robert Reid had the bandwidth to do this job and whether or not there was any conflict of interest. It seems that after just 2 months, it seems strange that when he was ready and willing and ready to get up and go on the 2nd of November, it's not even the 2nd of February, and he is retiring. That to me sounds odd, and I'd like to know the reason for it. The second thing is, we've mentioned who the non-executive director is, haven't we? We've said the name out. We haven't said who it is. Oh, I thought you said his name.
No. Once there's once this is approved, there'll be a process to identify and select that person.
Okay, that was my question. So we're only appointing Alan Robinson today.
Ken, you.
Yes, I believe that you're just appointing Alan Robinson today, and then approving in principle the appointment of a non-executive director that will then go ahead and be confirmed and reported back to the committee.
Okay, that's helpful. So can you confirm that there will be a competitive process for the recruitment of a non-executive director, and what would be the timescale for recruiting that person, and how would one apply?
Karen Bradford.
Thank you, Chairman. I can just confirm it will follow the same process as we did for Leisure SK non-executive director. So it was an application, an interview process, and then of course a recommendation to this committee. The point in the report there, we're only looking for it for an interim period to 1 year.
Sorry, was that your question?
That was my question. Obviously, I haven't had a response to the Robert Reid question yet.
And the bandwidth, Councillor Robert Reid.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I recently took the decision to step down from Environmental SK Board after a discussion with the leader and the Chief Executive. I value and feel that the duty is to uphold the respect and integrity of all members. I wanted to help, but I honestly feel as the Cabinet Member for Housing and Property, and I always stated that I would put that first, that as the ESK undertakes the grounds maintenance of our housing estates and operates the assisted garden scheme for our vulnerable tenants, I feel that there is a conflict of interest. At the time, I honestly felt that I could manage to balance the two, but in absolute transparency, I have found that there are issues within the HRA contract, and simply I might have been better to have taken the advice. Even I think Philip Knowles had said, Robert, are you really sure? Come back to the fact that I wanted to help. I think what I have done during the time of being the chairman is I have made way forward for the transparency of the company, and indeed refocused the company's direction more to the core needs of the council to do with the general fund, the HRA, and of course the special expense areas. It's not to say that I won't support the way forward, and indeed I certainly understand the difficulties, but I do think that what is now presented or is able to be presented to your good selves, and indeed right across to all committees on the council, is much more transparent and much more easy to access. And I hope that during my chairmanship, that's something that I promised to deliver, and indeed will be delivered. And I have every confidence in Adam Stokes moving it forward. It's not to say that I won't continue to help. It's not to say that I won't continue to look at the council's position as well. But what it is saying is that as the chairman of the company, I'll put my hands up. It was unattainable. I apologise for not being able to deliver that. If there's not really an apology needed, but I always try my best. There you are.
Okay, are there any other? I'll let you come back in a bit. Councillor Knowles, please.
Thank you, Chairman. You can hardly expect me not to come back. First of all, when this was announced, I challenged Robert as a friend and said there was a conflict of interest. And he said he was aware of the possibility, but he didn't think there was. And then informally, I spoke to Mr. Robinson, who said there was no conflict of interest. At the last company's meeting, it was me that asked the question about conflict of interest. And the monitor officer, to quote, said there were no decisions anticipated within Environment SK Limited that would be a conflict of interest, and any as such would be an exception. Now, that's a conflict in itself. There are no conflicts of interest, but when there are, we will take it as an exemption. It's a nonsense to start with. I then formally wrote to Mr. Robinson saying there was a conflict of interest, that being that the seller of services for SK Environment, one of his major customers was housing, and the leader of the housing was the same person who was the leader of the selling organisation. So the seller was selling to the buyer, who was the same person, and he was then he was a seller and the buyer. And you can't be that at the same time. So that there was clearly a conflict of interests. I got a formal reply from Mr. Robinson, which followed the words that are in this document here, that there was no conflict of interest. And I'm just glad to say that it's been recognised by Mr. Reid, at least, Robert Reid, at least, that there is a conflict of interest and it should never have been put out in that way in the first place. There was always a clear conflict of interest between those two roles. And I'm very, very pleased to say that now that's been corrected. I'm sorry for Robert that he was put in that position. And you no need to apologise. He didn't do that. But I do accept that he had to resign from that particular position. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments and questions in the room? I just have one question. It sounds as if you answered one of my questions, that Adam is going to be acting as the chairman going forward. Okay, so this is perhaps a question for Adam then. So I've asked this with each appointment of a director, Councillor Stokes. What's Alan Robinson's role on the board, and what does he bring to the board? What does that alter the balance of the board, and how do you envisage him playing a role in developing Environment SK on the board? Thank you, Councillor.
Well, yes, thank you. So obviously, Alan is very experienced local government officer, but he will be taking on the HR element of the company. We've all assigned ourselves at the last board meeting areas that we'll be concentrating on. So we'll be looking after the HR of the company, and also being an experienced officer, he's able to have the experience to help the company.
Okay, I'm grateful for that. That's the clearest answer I've ever received for that question. Councillor Dilks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to help too. I'm sure we all do. But may I say, as a non-member of this committee, looking in from the outside, there seems to be a pattern of confusion, to put it at its mildest, when it comes to appointing directors to the various string of companies that we've got. At your meeting before last, on the 21st of September, the Companies Committee agreed to the appointment of Councillors Dobson and Reid as directors to the Orbers Ridge Company. But it turned out that that didn't actually happen. There was no mention of that, nor any explanation in the minutes of the following Companies Committee on the 2nd of November, when it was left to an independent member to point out that Councillor Dobson was never in fact formally appointed as agreed by the Companies Committee. An explanation was then given. There was farcical confusion on the 2nd of November at your meeting, when no one, including the leader of the council, or I have to say senior officers, seemed to know who was or wasn't a director of the various string of companies. Needless to say, you won't get a sense of the farce that happened by reading the minutes that you've all just voted for as a true and accurate record of the meeting. In fact, on the 2nd of November, the Companies Committee approved the appointment of Councillor Reid to Environment SK and Environment SK Commercial Services Limited. As Councillor Reid has acknowledged, and I welcome that, questions were raised by Councillor Knowles about potential conflicts of interest. But these were dismissed. It was claimed that all had been properly considered and thought through, and robust assurances were given in the minutes that no such conflicts would arise. And it was advised, that was the advice we're told by the monitoring officer, that it was all okay, there's no conflict of interest. And now today, at the very next meeting, we're told that Councillor Reid is stepping down from his appointment. Councillor Reid actually said at the time, on the 2nd of November, and I listened to this again last night online, that, oh, it's all okay. He's looked at the conflict of interest, or the reference to it, and that he's taken reference from the chief executive and the leader of the council, and how much he found Alan Robinson's advice to be helpful. And now today we're appointing Alan Robinson to the committee instead. So what I've got to say is, unlike Councillors Dobson's non-appointment, I understand Councillors Reid's did actually happen, and I understand he did chair a meeting, as he said. But it just seems, if I can say, Mr. Chairman, from the outside, when are we going to get this right? It's just total confusion. It's a bloody pantomime.
Thanks for your comments, Councillor Dill. So I know that there have been changes, and I think that's the point that you made. I think it might be useful to produce a one-pager for councillors just to stay on top of who are directors for each company. I think that would be helpful. Councillor Baxter, you wanted to return, and then I'd like to take a vote and move on from this. If you want to just return, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the comments that have been offered so far. My first question is about the HRA. Councillor Reid mentioned that there were tensions between managing the best interests of the HRA and managing the contractor for the HRA. I'm not sure if this is the right point to ask what are those tensions, or whether we should keep that till the item further down the agenda. But certainly, whenever the time is, I'd like to discuss in the public domain what the tensions are between the HRA and the grounds maintenance supplier. My second question is, if it's a tension for the housing portfolio holder to be a director of the Environment SK, then surely the portfolio holder for finance, who sets the council's overall budget, there would be a similar tension. Surely there would be a similar tension between the cabinet member responsible for finances and budgets and so on, who is basically in charge of commissioning the services that we get from the TECL company, and between holding that portfolio and also being now chair, I understand, of the TECL company itself. So that's the first tension. I don't remember after Councillor Mosley resigned from the cabinet, not from the council, there was a reallocation of roles. I don't remember which cabinet member is now responsible for grounds maintenance. Is there a brief answer to that before I go on? Which cabinet member is responsible for grounds maintenance generally?
Councillor Reid?
It's not for me to answer that, but there is part of the question I'm very happy to answer.
We'll come on to that. If you could just, Councillor Cook, do you want to just clarify who's responsible for grounds maintenance?
It's Councillor Adam Stokes. I would like to come back on a few of the points though, because I think just for clarity.
I think there's several things to come back. If you could just finish your questions, please.
Yeah, so the obvious completion of that question is, if Adam Stokes is the cabinet member responsible for procuring grounds maintenance, how can he also be the chair of the company which is delivering grounds maintenance? Surely that's the same conflict of interest.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I was just going to come on to that. So I think firstly, Councillor Reid has extensive responsibilities on the cabinet already. We did seek advice from the monitoring officer prior to Councillor Reid's appointment. For many members, as you'll know, Dr. Mosley did have the responsibility as chairman of Environment SK, and he also had the responsibility for the grounds maintenance contract for the authority, which is far more significant in financial terms than the HRA element of that budget. Obviously, yes, Councillor Adam Stokes is presently the cabinet member, including grounds maintenance. There will be further announcements on Thursday in terms of a reshuffle. But ultimately, Councillor Stokes is the cabinet member for finance. He does not set the budget. The council sets the budget as a whole.
I'm grateful for that. Are you able to share the advice from Councillor, from the monitoring officer, that there's no conflict of interest with the entire committee?
Yes, of course. I understand he's already emailed Councillor Knowles about that, so I'm sure we can ask the monitoring officer to circulate that information to all members. And likewise, very happy to create a spreadsheet of appointments that can also be listed on our website. Obviously, my declarations of interest already list the director's appointments that I have on my declarations.
I'm grateful for those clarifications. Councillor Reid, you were asked about your comment on tensions. If you can just speak to that, please.
Yeah, I can be reasonably brief about it. The standard of service of the contract, I up-spec'd it and changed the criteria this time round. The monitoring that has come through in the last year, of which wasn't completed when I took the position in November, weren't pronounced. I am not satisfied for my tenants, my sheltered housing tenants, that it's being delivered properly. I've always and said first and foremost that my housing portfolio takes preference. That has been my major crash, and if I can put it so crudely, and why I hope other councillors will see where my priorities lie.
Okay, thank you. I have one final question. It may be covered in here actually, but I can't find it. Will the new non-executive director be an officer of the company? And if he's not an officer, why not? Is that Councillor Stokes?
In the context of an officer of the,
An actual director registered on the Company's House.
well, the decision we've taken as a board is to appoint a non-executive director that is able to help guide and with experience in that area, similar to Leisure SK.
Sure, but they won't become an officer, a legal officer of the company. Ken Lyons?
No, that's not the intention.
Is that simply because you felt it would limit the field, or is there a more material reason as to why you wouldn't make them legally responsible for the company's decisions?
Well, it's because it's a company fully owned by the council. So I think it's only right that the directors are involved with the council.
Okay, thank you for that. I would like to make some progress.
Sorry,
Councillor White, so could you make your closing comments brief, please? We've got a lot to cover today.
Yes, I'd like it to be clear in the minutes that even though according to our council constitution, that the deputy leader is the deputy leader and cabinet member responsible for finance has within his remit budget preparation, and obviously we've heard that the same person is also responsible for managing grounds maintenance. I'd like it clear within the minutes that there is no perceived conflict of interest, say cabinet members, there is no perceived conflict of interest between the role of deputy leader responsible for finance and grounds maintenance and the role as a director, because surely the role of the director of Environment SK is to maximise the income for Environment SK. The role of the cabinet member for finance is to minimise what we pay our contractors.
Your comments are noted. I would also add to that the advice will be shared with the committee, that the legal advice as has been requested. Okay, so if there's no objection, I'd like to take both.
Very briefly, Chair, if you get the document that was sent to me, it'll not take you a lot forward. I think it was 6 or 8 lines long, and it repeated what is in the minutes of the last company's meeting. There's no proper explanation of why.
I think we've requested additional clarification, so I think it's more than just a forwarded email that we're expecting there, but we'll await that. If there's no objections, I'd like to take both of these recommendations together. Do I have a proposer for both of these recommendations? Councillor Whittington, do I have a seconder for these recommendations? Councillor John Dawson, all those in favour of these two recommendations?
Mr. Chairman, before we take the vote, I wonder if I might just ask, I know that it's a person who's being appointed here. I know we've had the debate in the past as to whether it should be appointments or whether it should be the deputy chief executive and or the name. I just asked that question. I can see Callum would answer.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. We've had this clarity before. It needs to be a named person, not a named title, in order to appoint to a company. If you remember, Chairman, we had this debate probably over a year ago now, because it's, thank you, Richard, it's personal responsibility, so it has to be a named person that we vote on.
So for clarity, through you, Chair, for clarity, the second item says that we are approving the appointment of an interim non-executive director. Presumably, before we appoint, that will have to come back to this committee.
Councillor Cook.
Well, as far as I'm aware, it's the board that will then make that decision.
So we are not talking about an officer of the company here. So this is different to the conversation we had a year ago when we were talking about appointing an officer of the company to be registered as a director on Company's House. We are allocating a budget for, whilst they're referred to as a non-executive director, they're effectively a consultant. They're not an officer of the company with legal responsibilities on decision making. So I think this is different to the decision we had a year ago. So I do think both recommendations stand.
Sorry, Chair. Before I vote, I need to understand the process. who is responsible for appointing directors of Environment SK? Is it the board or is it this committee?
So this is not an appointment of a director. It is a non-executive director. A director is an officer of the company registered on Companies House that is legally responsible for the company. The non-executive director is not a legal responsibility of the company. Councillor Rice-Oxley.
Hello, can I ask why it would be a non-executive director with a post for up to 1 year rather than just employing a consultant as and when? I'm just interested to know why we would go down this route if it's essentially a consultancy role. Thank you.
Councillor Cook, my understanding is because they sit on the board, but Councillor Cook.
Yeah, that is just the decision that we have taken in terms of the way forward, and it's worked incredibly well through Leisure SK with the appointments of Mr. Monkhouse.
Councillor Knowles.
Yeah, sorry to drag this on, Chair. I don't mean to, but when I was a director of companies, I was both non-executive director and an executive director in different companies. I spent a lot of time with the IOD training and so on, and I was taught very, very soon from the beginning that a non-executive director has the same duties, the same directorial duties as an executive director, and the responsibilities of a non-executive director were equal to the shareholders as a director and an executive director. So it is, if it's an appointment of a director, he has the same responsibilities. He can't have lesser responsibilities in terms of the shareholders, his duty to the shareholders.
So with that in mind, can we expect this committee to after the process has been determined to have that individual come back to this committee so that we can approve that individual? Is the request of the committee. Karen Bradford.
Thank you, Chairman. There's no reason why a report can come back to this committee with the recommendation of the process for that individual to be appointed for a period of 1 year.
Okay, fine. So we're setting the budget at the moment, but we will be expecting that named individual to come back to this committee.
For clarity, and I'm still trying to understand the process. We have plenty of company directors in the room that should know the answer. Does this committee appoint the directors? Or does the board of the company appoint the directors? Mr. Monkhouse, who was mentioned earlier, is on the Companies House website under Leisure SK. So he has been appointed by someone to that board. I thought that Mr. Monkhouse came along here and we spoke to him and we appointed him. If we appoint the directors, then I'm happy to agree with point 1 on this, to appoint Alan Robinson. But I can't agree that we approve the appointment of the non-exec director because we don't know who that is yet.
So that's a repeat of my earlier question. Will this be an officer of the company registered on Companies House, or a non-executive director who's not on Companies House, who just sits on the board advising? Councillor Stokes.
So the intention is for the non-executive director to not be an officer of the company, to sit and to advise the board. So, however, as we've said, in terms of all of the processes, the recruitment process can take place, and that person can come back to this committee to be approved once at that point. But the intention is not for them to be on Companies House.
Okay, I think that's helpful, and that is clearly the feeling. Councillor Whittington.
Under companies law, a non-executive director is not an officer of a company. The executive directors undertake the executive functions. A non-executive director is not an officer of a company, and is not expected. If you let me finish, Councillor Baxter, I've allowed you to speak, and is not encouraged to enter into the fields of the areas that are covered by the executive directors. They're supposed to give an impartial advice to the board. So under companies law, and this is not me making it up, this is companies law, non-executive director is not an officer of the company. So if people want to argue, I suggest they speak to the people in Parliament who make our company law to say that they think there's a problem with it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I think we're getting bogged down in detail here, although I do appreciate the gesture that the individual will be presented back to the non-executive, because they'll be involved in influencing decision making on the board, will be brought back as a name to this committee, even though our remit is to approve officers of companies, i.e. those that are registered on Companies House, that are legally responsible for the company. So, Councillor Baxter, I think
for the third time of asking, who appoints the director of a company? Is it the board or is it this committee?
So as per our operating remit, we have veto power on company director appointments for officers of the company, i.e. those that are registered on Companies House.
No, that's not the question. The question is, who appoints directors of these council-owned companies? Is it the companies committee or is it the board of each company?
Okay, so we're getting bogged down into a discussion about the remit of this committee. I would suggest we take this outside of this, because we have covered this in earlier meetings. I'd like to go to the vote to make some progress here. Does anybody want me to take these votes separately? Okay, so item 1, Companies Committee, the recommendation item 1. Do I have a proposer for recommendation 1? Thank you, Councillor Whittington. Do you have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Dawson. All those in favour of recommendation 1, please raise your hand. Any against? And any abstentions? That is carried. Do I have a proposer for recommendation 2? Thank you, Councillor Whittington. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Dawson. All those in favour of recommendation 2? All those against? And any abstentions? Okay, that is carried. I'd like to make some progress, please. So moving on to...
Could I have my vote on that recorded, please?
Thank you. That's been recorded and that is noted. Moving on to item 7. The finance report of Environment SK, and this is in the hands of Councillor Stokes. Thank you.
Yeah, he's back. There we go. So thank you, Chairman. I'd like to introduce you to the second report on the Environment SK today, and this one is covering the finances. You will note that large segments of this report are in pink papers or private, so I won't comment on this in detail other than to say that it covers the accounts for 2021. The public accounts are available on the Companies House website. However, I am happy to take questions related to those accounts when and if the chairman moves into private session. The other elements of the report cover the cost of the grounds maintenance for the council in 22-23. The report sets out a proposal to increase the grounds maintenance budget for the council in 22-23 in view of the significant cost pressures in delivering the service, which include significant increases in costs due to minimum wage changes and national insurance, increases in fuel and utility prices. These costs are out of the control of the council and are reflected in a number of businesses in most and every sector. Number 2, the review of the grounds maintenance that is currently taking place, which should provide the council with an up-to-date specification for the grounds maintenance over the 365 square miles of the district, and options on how to most effectively manage the estate. 3, the operational challenges for Environment SK in the coming year and the steps that the company is taking to mitigate them, which refer to A, the retention of and recruitment of operational staff, significant cost increases as discussed above, approach to business growth and stabilisation. It should be noted that some of the questions you may have relate to Environment SK, in which case one of the directors of the company will respond, but any that relate to SKDC, we do have officers of the council here to respond to those. I will also remind members that there are a number of areas that need to take place in private session. I know that the chair will move us to that point at the appropriate time, and thank you, and I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Okay, let's try and stay in public session as long as possible. Are there any questions on the white papers to start off with? Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. As mentioned earlier, could I invite Councillor Reid to explain the tensions between the housing revenue portfolio and the directors of Environment SK? What specific issues are there between the housing revenue account and the delivery organisation?
Councillor Reid, did you want to start on that, or?
Well, I can just repeat myself. It's the standard of service, the monitoring of the contract within the HRA. To be sort of more specific, the number of cuts, the quality of the work that's done. And I'm not satisfied with the standard of improvement when I took over the portfolio to now. I really feel that these are practical reasons. They are foremost at the front of my mind, and I'm sure they are actually of yours, Councillor Baxter, in looking after our tenants and where they live and the grounds maintenance around them does really matter. And my conflict, my problem in equating this has not been the management of ESK, it has been the practicalities and the delivery of the level of service that I need for my housing tenants. That's been my problem. So I hope that's a bit more clearer for you, but I don't have anything else to say about it. I can run a company like anybody else, but I've just got a conflict practically.
Okay, moving on from that point, are there any other questions on the public papers?
So following on from that, is there an issue? Councillor Reid is not the first person who has mentioned issues of quality and Environment SK. Can I ask any of the directors of Environment SK if they have any issues with the quality of service offered by Environment SK, and has this impacted at all the number of outside contracts outside the council that have been won and kept?
Ken Lyon.
So, and yeah, so as an overview this year, so the report in there covers some of the challenges that Environment SK has faced this year. The principal of those has been around recruitment and retention of staff. You'll know, looking in the wider world, there's been huge issues around the workforce and the labour market, and Environment SK has not been immune to this, as have many other businesses. Which is why the directors, of which until a few minutes ago I was one, keen to work with customers and as a company to address those issues. So realistically, issues around performance standards, of which there have been some, but I believe have been worked on quite proactively with the client at the HRA, have been largely related to challenges around the workforce, and it's foremost in the company's plan to address those going forward. So that's the answer. In terms of outside clients, I think in general, the council ESK has had a pretty positive relationship with external clients, notwithstanding some issues, but I'm not close enough to the detail of each individual one to be able to answer questions about each one. However, I know Doug, who's the operations director at Environment SK, would be delighted to do that and invited to discuss with any members of companies committee at any point around those, and welcome you down to the depot to do that.
Gary Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just to echo and extend from the client side, I speak on behalf of the council from the grounds maintenance client side in regards to what Ken was just describing. We work very closely with Environment SK. Clearly, and the performance has been generally very good. We've had a good service, but there have been issues at times, largely due to, as Ken's described, the workforce shortages and challenges that they've had, and they've been Ken's been open about those. One of the additional kind of side benefits that we've had working with Environment SK is that alongside the performance and delivery of the grounds maintenance, we've been able to they've been very flexible and adaptable to respond to change in our priorities and changes in those priorities. So that's another dimension of that performance delivery from a client side perspective, that when issues have arose, they've been able to respond quickly to those and to deal with that. And that relates not only to the core services that they're delivering, but also stretches beyond that. And it's been cited many times in the past about the fact that when we were facing staff shortages in the street scene team around waste collections, we were able to successfully agree and ESK were incredibly flexible to release staff to be redeployed to help with that the waste collection services and the continuity of that crucial service at that key time during the pandemic. So the performance has been generally good. There are a few issues. There are, of course, with any grounds maintenance provider, that's the nature of things. But what we have had is a good working relationship and that flexibility. So hopefully that adds to that answer. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions in the public? Councillor Whittington.
Just going to say, Mr. Chairman, I've got questions, but they're in relation to the pink papers.
I'd like to go into private session in a moment. Then, of course, we'll return to public session before a vote based upon that. Are there any other questions? Okay, so the appendices to this report, agenda item 7 below, contains information that it is exempt from publication. The press and public may therefore be excluded during the discussion of these items on the agenda under paragraphs 1 and 2 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended during this item. Do I have a proposer for that, please? Councillor Whittington, do I have a seconder? Councillor Dawson, all those in favour of excluding press and public? And any against? And any abstentions? One abstention. Okay, so with that, I declare that press and public are excluded from this meeting. For this item.